Okay, well, welcome to the statewide 4-H Fly Fishing Club class or Zoom meeting number 3. We've had one. The first one was on flies, tying. The second one was on casting, and this one's going to be what do you say, Steve? Aquatic insects, or is that basically what it is? Okay, aquatic insects and the knowledge of that and how that will help you be a better fisherman. Know kind of what to use and all sorts of stuff. It's fun to learn all that stuff. We're gonna start out. Dave Wood is not on right now. He's had some other things, but we have some more updates on the camp that we're gonna have. It's gonna be probably July 14th at 10 o'clock, 10 to 1 or 2 or something like that. We haven't did all the particulars yet, but we'll probably do some fly tying demonstrations, and we'll probably have kits for kids to try, and maybe we'll do some techniques or something there for one of the groups. Another group, I think we're having I'm not sure if his name might be Ken, that might be coming to do a fly casting. There'll be a pond. I think it's Liberty Park by the is it the Salt Lake Aviary?
Yeah, Tracy Aviary.
Tracy Aviary. But there's a pond right there that we'll have kind of where we'll be doing our camp. We thought about doing a camp kind of out in the sticks, but it might be hard to get people out there 2 hours, 3 hours away, and then only have them there for 3 hours and then kind of come back. So we'll try this one when we get bigger. When we get a bigger group, the camp will be kind of a fun destination for kids who've been in it maybe 2 or 3 years, and we can actually, instead of maybe doing demos out there, we'll actually go fishing and help you fish and kind of like stuff like that. So that might be a better route to go, but we're just building, but we'll keep going on that. So that's the update of the camp. Keep watch on the let me put this up here, whoops, wrong one. The Utah fly fishing goose chase. We have quite a few kids in there, and remember at the state contest September 10th, we will announce the winners. The winners will first, second, third, might be down to 10th place. We'll get prizes. First prize is a whole setup, fly rod, reel, line, kit, and bunch of other, some other things. So it'll be pretty nice. So keep working on that fly fishing goose chase. And then we're going to talk a little bit about water conservation and quality, probably in the next. I think that's our next meeting mostly. So we'll wait on that to talk on that. But today we're going to talk to Steve. Has done a lot of research, a lot of courses and stuff, Steve, as far as aquatic insects and anything. Is that the only aquatic insects? Is that what it is, or was there something else with it, or just?
Yeah, we were just going to talk about, give you kind of an introduction to aquatic insects, kind of identification, and we'll talk a little bit about kind of why we care about those and how we can use that biological knowledge to improve our fishing.
Yeah, and then maybe the life cycle a little bit, or like that, just so you kind of know how
life cycle.
What you're seeing on the river, what's happening, kind of thing. And it's pretty amazing and fun to kind of know all that stuff. So let's see. So yeah, let's go ahead and turn it over to Steve, and he'll kind of guide us through today's information and education about cool stuff, bugs. Okay, go ahead, Steve.
All right, we'll share screen here.
Yeah, see if that. Yeah. Oh yeah, it looks like it's. Yep, it's working.
Okay. Let's do. Okay, so you should be seeing my presentation there.
Yep, I see it.
All right. Easy. I didn't mess it up this time. All right. So, like Blake said, I've been joining in on these Zooms. My name's Steve Price. So to give you guys some background, when I went to college, I actually studied aquatic entomology for a number of years. I actually led a few research teams when I was at Southern Utah University, doing some basic categorical work for the national monument there, Cedar Breaks National Monument. So we did a lot of identification, and I've kind of That's always kind of stuck with me as I've gone through my other entomological training and kind of going into field biology and what I do now. So I could talk for hours and hours about aquatic bugs, but we won't have quite that much time. So I'll try to keep going through this. So some of you might ask yourself, well, why do we care? Why do we care that there's bugs in the river? Ultimately, I would say at the very least, we should care about the bugs in the river because a lot of what fish eat are bugs, are insects. A huge food source, especially when our game species are small in either lentic or lotic systems, streams, or even lakes. A lot of their diet is composed of insects. And a lot of times when you're fly fishing, what you're doing is trying to find a fly or an artificial insect that you are trying to convince that fish that it is a real insect, real live insect, a natural, as we call it in fly fishing. So knowing a little bit about kind of how insects look or how they behave can help you improve your fishing. I would say that insects are also way cool, so that's why we should learn about them. So you can see here, insects are the main way, or invertebrates, are the main way that we're turning nutrients from algae in the water that are photosynthesizing or stuff falling into the river like leaves. It's our invertebrates or tiny animals that don't have a backbone. They have an exoskeleton, so they don't have bones. They are turning all of those organic materials into food for fish, as well as other vertebrates in the river. So they are a massively important part of our ecology that's going on in the river. So to kick this off, we're going to talk about mayflies. You'll see the order names here, which is the scientific name for those. You don't really need to know those, but entomologists, we really like our Latin names for stuff. But if you can get mayflies on our goose chases and test for our competition, that's gonna be good. So when we look at the life cycle of mayflies, they start off as eggs. The eggs are dropped in the water and then they sink to the bottom of the water, and then they're going to live on the substrate or the rocks and sand that are in the bottom of the river, or in some cases the pond. They're going to live there usually about a year, maybe 2 years in some cases, but usually about a year, or in some cases a couple months. And then they're going to develop. So this is called the nymph. Eventually, they're going to reach maturity and they're going to come out of the water. Okay, they don't live underwater their whole life, just the nymph does. So as they come out of the water, they float to the top, or in the case of some of them, they actually kind of skyrocket out of the water or crawl out of the water. And then you have kind of what we call an emerger. In this case, in this case, the emerger is floating down the river and it's trying to break out of that old exoskeleton. That nymphal exoskeleton, what we call a shuck in fly fishing, it has to break out of it so it can fully expand its wings. And here is where mayflies are really weird. When they hatch out, they look like an adult. They have wings, they have their body segments, their legs. They look almost just like an adult, except they're not. They're not quite an adult. This is called a dun. And even though they look like an adult, what they're going to do is actually shed their exoskeleton again. into the true adult, the adult that can reproduce. In fly fishing, we call that the spinner. This is the only order of insects in the whole world that have that extra step, going from an immature insect to a mature one, having this done stage and then molting into the spinner. The only group out there that does this. So the spinners, these things fly around. Mayflies aren't very long lived. They'll live anywhere from a couple days to a few weeks, and then they will reproduce and lay eggs in the water. And then eventually they will die. A lot of times when they die, they actually hit the water, and then they kind of just, their bodies are floating down the stream with their wings kind of splayed out. And that's actually what we call a spent spinner. It's spent. It's already reproduced. It's already died. So let's look at these a little bit more. So mayflies, those hatches can be huge. I mean, these are all bugs. All this stuff that looks like dirt over this car, this is all mayflies. As you can imagine, if you're a fish, if you're a fish that was by the river where this happened, that's a huge food source. It's also a really important part of the ecology of the river, because when those mayflies hatch, they're moving a lot of energy out of the river ecosystem and into the terrestrial ecosystem. And in a lot of cases, as they're on the banks and they die and they're decaying or getting eaten, they're actually fertilizing the plants on the riparian area. So they're actually moving a huge amount of nutrients in and out of the river as they're going through their life cycle. So very important part of the ecology. So identification, how do we identify a mayfly? So mayflies, the nymph, which is what we call the fly that we used to fish underwater with, is a nymph. We also call the young of mayflies nymphs. So they tend to be pretty small, kind of brown, sometimes kind of cream color, and they have 3 tails. 1, 2, 3 tails. So that's the first key, 3 tails. Their gills that they breathe through are also located on the abdomen. So the third body segment, you have head, thorax, abdomen. Their gills are on the abdomen, and those kind of flutter and move around in the water to collect oxygen. Same thing down here, 3 tails, gills on the abdomen. So you'll notice we have a couple different body shapes. So this guy, this is a Baetis. He's kind of round. If you were to look at him in cross section, he's kind of built like a tube. He's perfectly round. This type of mayfly is a burrower. So it actually lives underneath the rocks and inside the interstitial areas of the sand, burrowing around and eating little bits of detritus. So they're kind of tube shaped. We also have these guys that live on the surface of a rock. These guys are built like race cars. They're super, super compressed. They're very flat, and their heads are angled. That way they're more hydrodynamic. So as they're sitting on top of the rock, they don't get washed away downstream. These guys are scrapers. These guys are scrapers. So they're walking around on the rocks and eating all the algae, what we call periphyte. They're eating all the algae and little bits of detritus on the surface of the rock. So we have quite a few different types of mayflies, and I think Blake would agree, some fly fishermen get really interested in talking about types of mayflies.
Yep.
They're a really, really cool group. So again, so identification, so we have that done or subadult stage. So when they hatch, after they emerge, they have their wings. So you have 2 pairs of wings, 4 pairs all together, and they're held upright. They're held upright like a sail, like a sailboat. above their heads, or like a tent kind of. And then they have their tails. They have long tails when they're adults as well. Those subadults tend to be kind of squishy. They never really harden up to a true exoskeleton. They stay kind of squishy, kind of cloudy looking. Their wings are kind of cloudy. Fish love these. They are like the best food ever because they're like little cheeseburgers floating down the river. They can't fly away very well. They can't do much. And they're nice and soft, perfect little snacks. And then they molt into an adult. So they're going to molt again, shed that exoskeleton. And so now they have their adult form where they're actually going to kind of harden up, become a little bit crunchier. So we have ones that are kind of bigger, like this Yellowstone or yellow mayfly. And we have little tiny guys like our Batis or blue-winged olive. We have some that are even smaller than this. And these are what we are, these adults, these spinners. A lot of times we're using things like this is a parachute Adams to imitate a spinner. There's tons of different flies that are meant to imitate the spinners or the adults. We have certain classes of dry flies called spent wings that are actually just meant to mimic those spinners. Once they die, they've spent, they've reproduced, they land on the water. So this kind of looks a little bit like a mayfly here on the bottom with its wings splayed out. So cool critters. Stoneflies, these are another one of my favorites. So the nymphs are the young, so they live in the rocks, and then they'll eventually crawl out of the river, and then they'll fly around and then reproduce, drop eggs in the river, and then they'll die. Stoneflies live a lot longer than mayflies. Mayflies actually, they don't even have a mouth. They can't eat. All they are there to do is reproduce. Stoneflies can actually eat. They can nibble on little bits of leaves and stuff. So they'll live, a month or so, typically before their life cycle is over. So again, the nymph or the young are located underwater, and stoneflies have two tails. So our mayflies had 3 tails. Stoneflies have 2 tails, and they don't have gills on their abdomen. Okay, that's not where their gills are. Their gills are on the thorax, so between the legs. So you can think of it like having hair in your armpits that are helping you breathe underwater. These guys they can be all different sizes. This Isopoda, he's about this big. Our small winter stoneflies are really, really small. These guys are mostly detritivores. They're eating weird little dead bits in the river. Sometimes they can also be scrapers, eating algae and stuff like that. And again, we're using nymphs to kind of imitate these a lot of the time. Here's a few different types. So they come in all different sizes. So this little guy, this small winter stonefly, so that's sitting on the end of some guy's finger. So he's really small guy. Something a little bit bigger, something that you could actually catch between your fingers. This is a golden stonefly. And then one of our favorites in fly fishing are the giant stoneflies, the salmon flies. When these guys hatch, the fish love it. These are like their favorite snack. Sometimes it can be hard to fish when there's so many salmon flies around because they ignore what you're throwing. They just want to eat the naturals. The other thing about the adults is you'll notice that they hold their wings kind of covering their body. So our mayflies hold their wings upright like a sailboat. These guys fold their wings flat across their body once they mature. You can actually see that they have their little mouth parts here. Caddisflies, these are another great group. So the young in caddisflies, we don't call those nymphs. We're actually going to call those larvae. So this is more like the life cycle of a butterfly, and that butterflies have a caterpillar and then a pupa, and then you have an adult. These guys are similar. They have something that actually kind of looks like a caterpillar that lives underwater, and then they're going to form a pupa, and then they're going to come out of the water as an emerger, and then crawl up on land, and then fly around, reproduce, lay eggs in the water. What's really cool about caddisflies is a lot of species actually lay their eggs underwater. They actually hit a branch and then they'll crawl back underwater to lay their eggs. So these are a huge importance to both fly fishermen and diets of fish, because now rather than having one life stage that's underwater, now you have two life stages that are underwater. So these can be really important food sources. And when the hatch is on for these guys, and that's what fish are eating, a lot of times they get very picky. You really have to have a good fly to imitate those caddisflies. So here you can see the larvae. So a lot of them have these cases. This one has built its case out of sand particles. They kind of glue them together to help protect them. It's like a turtle's shell, helps protect them from getting ate or from getting eaten by little things. The fish don't care. They still eat them case and all. This one has made kind of a square case out of some sticks. This one has made some out of some moss particles. So these guys, they're case bearers a lot of times, and they kind of look like a caterpillar if it had really long legs. This one, you can actually trick them. So if you get a case bearer and you put it in an aquarium and you give it some little metallic gold pebbles and pearls and gems, they'll think that it's natural river rocks, and they'll still glue themselves, cover themselves with these little decorative bits. So then you can actually, once that bug leaves, you can actually stick these together and make some jewelry, some earrings. Not all caddisflies have cases. The ones that do have cases tend to be either detritivores or sometimes predators. This one is a caseless caddisfly. These tend to be more predators, or sometimes they actually make a little web. They make a little web funnel under a rock. And then what happens is as the water goes through the funnel, it acts like a sieve. So they can catch all of the particles drifting down the water through the river and scoop it into their mouths to eat. So they tend to be either filter feeders, or in a lot of cases, they can be predators too. This one is probably a predator. He's got really, really strong legs for grabbing prey. So as adults, these guys, instead of holding their wings upright over their body like a sailboat, they make more of a tent over their bodies, okay? And they actually do have scales on them, which is interesting. The other insects that have scales on their wings are butterflies. These are not that distantly related from butterflies. So they tend to look kind of like little moths. Sometimes when they're scurrying around on the rocks, sometimes they look more like a cockroach or something. But they tend to look kind of like little moths, little hairy guys, with their wings bent over, like you're seeing here. So really important ones to know. The a lot of the insects I've talked about so far, particularly the mayflies, these are indicators of water quality. If you have polluted rivers, they won't live there. They have to have nice, clean water, usually cool water. They can't handle a lot of silt. So they're good indicators to know if we have pollution in our river. So flies, we have a few different types of flies. We're probably not going to make you guys memorize the different types of flies, but there's midges, or sometimes you'll hear these called bloodworms. But midges have this larval stage that's kind of like the larvae of caddisflies, but they don't have any legs. So these are true flies. So the larvae don't have any legs. They tend to be red a lot of times. So sometimes if you're fishing with a San Juan worm, something like that, or a bunch of our different midge patterns that are red, the reason that they're red is that they live in low oxygen water, sometimes polluted water. These guys can live in polluted water. Their blood has special compounds in it that help capture oxygen, just like the way our blood is designed to catch oxygen. And our blood is also red, so similar concept. So they live more inside of the gravel, down in under the rocks, inside the gravel, or in the aquatic vegetation. We see these in these midges in both ponds as well, in lakes as well as the river. And then when they hatch into adults, they look kind of like a mosquito. It's kind of like a mosquito, but it doesn't bite. Midges don't, they don't live on blood. If anything, sometimes the males will eat nectar. So sometimes when we have big hatches of these, people freak out because they think there's a million mosquitoes, and it's really just these midges, perfectly harmless. And as true flies, they have one set of wings. So they only have two wings. That scientific name of Diptera means two wings. These are some of our favorites during winter fishing, winter fly fishing, because these will hatch all year around. They can have very quick life cycles. They'll hatch all year round. We also have gnats. So this is actually a black gnat, or simuliid fly. So these live, if you have some swift water that's flowing over big rocks, a lot of times on the back side of the rock downstream, you'll see all these little black things lined up. And that's these simuliid flies, these black flies. So their heads have antennae that are kind of brush shaped. So they live on the backside of the rocks, and they use those brushes to filter feed whatever little bits are coming down the water to put in their mouth. And then as adults, these are small, really, really small flies. Some of them bite humans. Buffalo gnats can bite humans. A lot of them feed on blood of birds or other things. So not all bite, but some do. We see those occasionally. So I've got two more bugs here. So dragonflies. This is a dragonfly nymph. So again, it has legs. It looks more like the adult. We're going to call this a nymph, or sometimes a naiad. So you'll notice it's got big old eyes. It has big old teeth here. These are predators, okay? They're visual predators. I'll show you something real quick, which is fun, but these are kind of stubby. They're kind of just sausage shaped. They don't have any tails. So the way that these things breathe is they actually suck water in through their behinds. Their gills are inside. So they suck water in, they take the oxygen out, and then they squirt it out and then take in another bunch of oxygen. So a lot of times when you push these, these or mess with them, they'll squirt that water out and they'll kind of zip around the water as they squirt the water out. So they have what's called, so they're predators, and they have what's called a labial mask. So the labial mask is actually an extension of their mouth that shoots out and grabs. In this case, copepods, they're actually grabbing stuff out of the water. They're not picky eaters. They will eat little tiny copepods. They will eat goldfish. They will eat tadpoles. Anything that's small enough for them to get around, to get on, they will eat them, which is why we like having them around to eat mosquito larvae. As adults, we're all familiar with dragonflies. Very pretty, very cool. They have 4 wings as adults. These are also predators, aerial predators, so they have very big eyes. You'll notice their wings sit flat. They hold their wings out flat, okay? So just remember that for a second. So damselflies, this is another type of Odonata related to dragonflies. They're also predators, very similar shape overall, a little bit thinner. They also have these tails. So rather than breathing internally through their abdomen, they have gills coming out the back to breathe with. The adults look very much like small, slender dragonflies, except their 4 wings, their 2 pairs of wings, they hold over their backs. They don't hold them outright. We have true bugs. So these are Hemiptera, meaning they have a sucking, piercing mouth part. These are predators. We have waterboatmen that swim around. You see them in ponds a lot. They'll swim around and then they'll pop up to the surface. And on their bellies, they have some hairs that trap an air bubble. And then then they'll dive back down. They have these very long back legs that are feathery like oars, so they can kick around. And we have our backswimmers, which look very similar, closely related, except these guys live their whole life kind of upside down as they swim around. They're kind of fun little guys to see. We have aquatic beetles. So these are true beetles, ditystids or predaceous water beetles. Again, they have these nice oar back legs to help swim around. These guys are also predators. They'll eat anything, even minnows. We have little tiny beetles like this riffle beetle that they're kind of dorky little guys. They just kind of climb around on the rocks and eat little bits of algae. We have water pennies. Not so much in Utah, but in other places we see water pennies, which are a type of beetle. And then we have not true aquatic invertebrates. These are what we call terrestrials. So obviously, as we have a river flowing through a landscape, other bugs fall into that river and the fish don't care where they came from. They just know they're nice little snacks. So some important ones for us are ants, especially during the summertime. These can be very important food sources. In particular, the reproductive ants, so what are going to become the ant queens that have wings, are really important because they fall in the river. We have beetles, various types of scavenger beetles and all sorts of beetles that are climbing around the riverbanks that end up in the river. Grasshoppers can be a huge important food source for fish, especially where we have really nice lush meadow banks along the sides of our streams. They end up falling in the water sometimes, and they get eaten. And then we have little things like leaf hoppers. These these live in the trees and a lot of the brush that overhangs um, the banks, so they can be important. In fact, the British, so we call these cicadelids. The British call them jacids, and they have traditionally the British have a lot of flies that are meant to be jacid flies, because they found that they work very well. That's not a tradition that we have in the United States, but we have a lot of things that are like this that fall in the river. So some not insects that also live in the river are scuds or amphipods. These are crustaceans. Okay, they have many more legs than 6, and they have many more body parts than 3, like insects. These live under the water their whole life, and they're related to things like crawdads and lobsters and shrimp and crabs. So these are vertically compressed, meaning they're flat this direction. These are pretty important for us. They're eating a lot of stuff in the water and eating aquatic plants, and scavenging things. This is an isopod, so they are dorsoventrally flattened, so they're flat. So these guys, rather than going through the water like scuds, these tend to be more on the surface of the rocks. These are relatives of the little roly-polies, the little wood lice that you find underneath rocks and stuff out in your garden. These are also crustaceans. They can't roll up, but they're related to roly-polies. We have some non-arthropods, so like snails. Lots of snails out there living in the water, and they are also fish food. And then we have annelids, which are segmented worms that can include things like leeches. I'll just have to say, everybody's afraid of leeches, but most leeches are predators. Very, very few are bloodsuckers. And a lot of them are actually really good moms. A lot of them have little pouches on their belly that they keep their young in, and then they go and hunt down snails or other little worms and feed their young. So these can be an indicator species as well, in that some leech species can survive pollution and some can't. The last one we're going to talk about, so another annelid, we have aquatic worms, aquatic segmented worms that live, they tend to live in more kind of the muck and mud of the river or lake. Important nutrient cycles. They're a lot of times, as they are moving in and out of that sediment, they're taking the nutrients that are accumulating on top of the sediment and moving it down into the sediment where plants can take it up. So important part of the ecology. Fish love them. And earthworms. Earthworms don't live in the water, but they end up in the water a lot of times. Especially right now when you have high flows, the water's kind of dirty. It's amazing how many earthworms end up in the river, and fish end up eating them. So that's a hopefully quick enough primer on aquatic entomology. It's really fascinating stuff, and hopefully learning a little bit about the ecology and where these things are living in the river helps you become a better fly fisherman.
Yeah, that was great, Steve. That's a lot of good education for anybody who wants to learn to fly fish, because they get into fly tying and they start imitating those things, and they're each one of those that you talked about probably has 1,000 different flies that could be tied for that specific bug. So but that's the fun part about it. In fly fishing, I guess sometimes you get to the point where you want every one of the flies that you can get your hands on to tie, but eventually, I guess, at least for me, I'm in the stage where I've got about maybe a dozen nymphs and maybe a dozen dry flies, and and then I kind of just keep to those. And if I can't catch a fish with those, I might as well just stay home. but usually, if you got kind of the basic ones of and you can kind of imitate something and present it right, you can catch fish. So you don't have to have the exact, but it sure helps if you have the color, size. Color and size are probably the most important thing on artificials. And then the main thing is your drift, and we'll talk about that. If it's dragging, not natural, if it's pulling along the water or something like that, the fish are going to go, hey, that doesn't look right. I'm going to go grab this one over here that looks right. So, but that's all a part of it. Just one more aspect of learning. There's some guys that write books about aquatic insect for fishing, and that there's probably thousands and thousands of books for that. So you can really go to town on those things. But it's just another fun thing about fly fishing. There's so many things you can go into and learn about. So that's what makes it fun. If it was just one thing, it'd be boring. But it's probably 40 things you can delve into, go down a rabbit hole, pretty far down the rabbit hole on each one.
Absolutely. There are people that spend their entire lives fly fishing, and they'll be the first to admit that there's still more to learn.
Yeah.
It's awesome. I love
and that's what makes it fun, because you never master it to the full. You can get really good at it, but
you can get really good, but you can always learn something new.
Yeah. So it's a lot of fun. That way, just it's always a learning experience. So, but yeah, I think that was really good. I think that covered everything that the kids would need to give them a good foundation of flies. So a lot of kids, when they start to fly fish, they'll go out and go, they'll grab the rod and reel and go, what flies do I need at the store? They don't know what to pick. But once they go out on the river and see what's happening and know what's happening, they're like, well, I might need to get some spinners, because I saw a lot of these dead mayflies that were going down the river, and fish were coming up all over, and I was catching nothing. So they know what to either tie or what to buy. So
that's a great point. Kind of being able, now that you guys can have some few basic ways of identifying these things, next time you're out on the river, take a look. And even before you start fishing, take a look, see if you're seeing some of those things flying around or sitting on branches. Grab a couple rocks, flip them over, see what you're seeing. Because knowing what invertebrates are there, you can learn how to use that to your advantage. So you know what you need to buy and kind of what is going to help you catch fish.
Yeah, and most of your major rivers or even small streams will have a book, not written about them, but they'll have fly hatch charts. So you can go, say, the Provo River, the Madison River, the Snake River. You can find a book that have in July or in January, they'll have this. In February, they'll have this. They'll have, in April, May, June, July, whatever, they'll have what's going to be hatching, kind of when. And then you get to the point where during the day too, they're kind of what do they call it? The hatch? Is it the flow or what is it when they hatch all at once? That's kind of this. Is there a word for that?
There is a name. Some insects, particularly like some of those mayflies, you have kind of the hatch, which is all of them coming up, and then they'll move upstream. They'll fly upstream. So there is a name that we use for that. And then they lay eggs upstream. Baetis do this a lot. You see this with Baetis, mayflies. That way the eggs and the nymphs, as they're growing up, don't end up in the Great Salt Lake. The population stays up in the Provo.
Yeah, it stays up higher. So yeah, it's all figured out, however it's figured out, but it's fun to see that the hatch or something coming off, and you have to really get kind of particular about what you're throwing at them. And one thing too, if there is a hatch, before the hatch is good fishing. Right at the hatch, it might be a little tough because you have an artificial and there's tons and tons of naturals. So you have to either put it in the right spot or, really full of fish to get him eat yours. And it has to be close enough to eat yours instead of the one right next to it that's a natural. So it's fun that way. But I think that's everything today. That'll be a good video for the kids that they get on that, anybody really, and look at that and just understand. If they understand that alone, and then they can build on it, but that will help just give them a good foundation for fly fishing and knowing what fly to pull out of their box when they see something caddisfly or anything like that. So, but I think anything, what would be, we have one more class like this, I think. Is that right, Steve?
I think we have
Do we
one
have
more in, yeah, I think we have one more, and then we have our day camp.
the camp?
Practice
Okay.
camp.
Yeah, the next one I think is on water conservation. So I think we might go back to you, Steve, if we don't get Christy on or something like that, and then we'll kind of work together. And then Dave may he'll be able to get back on there. He's a big part of the camp that's coming up. So, but I think for now we'll go ahead and close this one out. I think we did good, and then I will send this out to all the club members that signed up and have them watch. I see when I get on the YouTube video, I can see how many people watch it. So after I send it, there's a lot of people that watch it, so we know that it's getting watched and getting that education out there. So, anything
Awesome.
else, Steve, that you want to put, or I think we're good with this.
I'm good.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, thanks, and then we'll see you next time, and we'll get that one going and go from there. So, all righty. Okay.
Tight lines.
All right. We'll talk to you later, Steve. Bye bye. Thank you.